So we're just gonna start talking. And of course, this is Think for a Change, episode 2.
I love the name.
Do you like the
Yes.
11 name? I appreciate that. Yeah. So I brainstormed that with John, but we're going to talk about greed, Aspen style. This really germinated from Joey's comment on episode 1, where we were talking about Lift 1A, where there might or might not be some greed involved at some level. And we thought it would be good to dedicate a whole episode to the idea of, what is Aspen the kind of place where greed is a more acute problem than it is elsewhere? Is there, how does it affect our community? And what can we do about it as a community? So, I just think it's really interesting. And Roger Merle, you mentioned Roger Merle, he was on episode 1. He had an interesting column, his most recent column, where he was kind of doing a long-term assessment of the value of a real estate investment in Aspen. And he kind of came to the conclusion that, if you'd have bought a house in Aspen in 1950 and owned it till today, you probably would have been better off just buying the index of the S&P 500. You probably would have actually made more money than a house in Aspen. And so what is it about, and you don't think about that. I think you think, boy, if I could have just, if my parents would have just bought a house in Aspen in 1965, and held on to it, I'd be on Easy Street right now, right? But according to Roger, that would have netted you somewhere between 5 and 6%, I think. I think the S&P between stock growth and distributions is averages about 7% over the last 50 years, something like that. So I thought that was interesting. But
I'd rather have the house in Aspen, frankly.
Yeah, you'd rather have the house in Aspen
than the extra 2%.
Than the indexed fund.
The extra 2%.
And I want someone to tell me if that's true moving forward, so I know where to invest.
Where you invest, well, that's it, right? If you know that. So is that a greedy statement to say that? Are you being greedy when you say that? Or are you just looking at your own interest? It's just, you're not I don't think you're a greedy person.
Well, we'll find out.
Yeah. So
I think you have to separate out a desire, like ambition, from greed. Mm-hmm. I like how you've identified greed as something that gets to excess. You want beyond what would be good for you, what would be good for others. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that, I think wanting to better yourself isn't in itself greedy.
Okay. Joey?
Well, when you were doing the intro, I was thinking we always relate greed with money. It doesn't always have to be about money either. You could be greedy about a lot of things that have nothing to do with finance.
Right.
And you could be greedy with your time. You could be greedy with a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I found fascinating, is what else could we be greedy about besides U.S. currency?
Right.
Which is what it's usually related to, is money. But, I think we could be greedy with, for example, in the case of Aspen, might be the entrance to Aspen. We're very greedy or protective of the entrance and our environments. Let's seal this place off so no one else could get to it. Now, I'm not advocating one way or the other.
Right.
I'm just using this as an example.
Right. Well,
So
it's a real-life example.
Is that an example of greed? Let's put up a closed for business sign, and we'll do that by making it very difficult to get here. So that could be a form of greed. Right. And I think there is a lot of examples of that right here that have nothing to do with currency.
So that's almost like a collective selfishness, something like that? Or like, I'm the last one in and let's just close the door behind me and let's kind of freeze it in time kind of a thing? Because, I've seen that other places I've lived as well. I lived in a little town in Washington State called the town of Steilacoom, Washington, and it's a little New England cottage on Puget Sound, basically. It was platted by a couple of Maine shipping magnates back in the 1800s, literally, and it looks like a little New England fishing village right on Puget Sound, and it's become kind of a roost because you look out over Puget Sound at the Olympic Mountains in the background and Fox Island and Anderson Island in front of you. And if you remember, several years ago they had one of the big golf tournaments out in that area at the Pierce County golf course out there, and it was widely panned as a terrible course, but they had all these beautiful views, and that's where I lived, and I went to school out there, and it was the same kind of a thing. People didn't want anything to change, and you'd have battles between neighbors over trees, Joe's tree is grown 3 feet, and now it's blocking my view of the mountain. And the town should require Joe to cut his tree down.
That happens
Someone
here.
in Hunter Creek
That actually happens here.
in the dark of night went and cut down some trees that had over time blocked their view of Aspen Mountain. And that's local. So that would be my other question for you, I guess, when you talk about is anything particular in Aspen about greed? Who do you mean by the people of Aspen? Because I do think there's a reputation for Aspen that has almost nothing to do with Aspenites.
I think you're right about that. We can go back to kind of the central element, which is probably real estate.
Okay.
Because it's supply and demand. There's never going to be enough real estate in Aspen to satisfy the demand for people who, if they could afford it, would move here.
Would live here, you think? That's said a lot, but I'm actually not convinced.
Well, would either live here or have a second home here.
So that's who already has taken up all the real estate, of course.
Yeah.
But I think that we have to make it hard or else everyone would live here is a very untrue statement.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many things you get from so many other parts of this country and this world that you can't get here. So I don't think just saying if you build it, they will come is true. You're not taking into consideration so many other things about what a family looks like or what occupations look like, what's rewarding to most of the rest of the population. So I'm not totally in agreement.
Well,
with you on
there are a lot of other places. It's not an exclusive characteristic of Aspen, but I think it's very clearly part of Aspen. And anyway, Joe, what do you think?
I forgot where we were. We kind of went off track there for a minute, but no.
The premise was
exclusive to Aspen.
Everybody would move here if they could.
Yeah, and I don't.
And Alycin is saying no, that would.
I think everyone would own a house. Who wouldn't, right?
But you could say that about San Diego.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't want to live in
visit?
San Diego?
Essentially, is what you're saying.
I think we could name that about a lot of cities.
So that's not unique.
Is
about
greed
Aspen.
exclusive to Aspen? Hell no.
Right.
We also have to look at the other side of the coin. We're talking about greed and currency and properties and things like that. Let's not spend too much time knocking around Aspenites. There's also a lot of benevolence in Aspen. There's an incredible amount of people that give up a lot of time and a lot of money to help other people out.
That's true.
But it is funny how the greedy stand out over the people that are out there raising funds. And to the point of Aspen is, I think when we moved here, you did give up a lot to live here. You did work. You did work hard to get a little piece of the pie. And you had prompted me in another conversation about this is, in my profession, I've seen in 35 years as a police officer in this hamlet, a lot of people who see wealth, see greed, see money, and want to attain it. And when they can't attain it, the consequences for them are dire. You feel less than yourself because you're not as rich as everything that's around you. You don't feel good about yourself. You feel like you're almost a failure.
Right.
We've seen a lot of people take advantage of wealthy people.
Yes.
And I've also seen on a very negative downside, a lot of people who desire wealth so much that when they can't get it, it ends up in a suicide. Or they're so far in debt from trying to keep up with people that we cannot keep up with.
Right.
Or at least even the community's perception.
Right.
And it ends tragically. And as I was walking in here today, I thought about one of the first cases I ever thought of in 1988 or 9. Boogie's had a bookkeeper who took hundreds of thousands of dollars from him. And that was one of the most publicized cases of that. And it was all in the name of keeping up.
Yeah.
And then I thought, how many of these really rich fat cats don't report that they've been taken advantage of? Because the worst thing in the world would be somebody like Jeff Bezos to be clipped by somebody like Alycin.
Right.
It doesn't feel good, to be outsmarted by somebody who, probably not as savvy as you are.
Right. No, I mean, we've got one of those issues kind of running to its resolution in the community now. We don't need to talk about names or anything.
Yeah.
But that's an ongoing issue. And it does seem to be more acute here than other places that I've lived. And you see it not just with rich people or businesses. You see it in government. Garfield County Clerk's Office had it happen 3 times in a year, I think, or in a couple of years. Yeah, 3. I mean, it was like the cottage industry in their office for it was really, really unfortunate.
Yeah. But it's also how do you tell people you don't have to keep up?
I think that's right. It's like the culture.
It's the culture.
So
right.
if you look around and you think everyone has 2 snowmobiles and you only have 1, how do you get that second one? But when you got here, you didn't have any. So like, what taught you that you needed both?
Right.
You know, like, and I don't really. I hope it's not your friends and neighbors, because I don't think that's how we relate. Like, who's got what? Maybe a little bit. Who's got what toy? But yeah, I don't know where that pressure is coming from and why here more than other places.
Yeah, I don't understand it either. I mean, I could understand it, you know, if your neighbor gets a new car and you, boy, I wish I could have a new car. But, you know, that's almost a parallel.
Right.
We're both making kind of the same amount of money, and boy, I'm really, you know, you get almost a little jealous. Alycin got a new car, but you're trying to catch up to billionaires.
Well, and the other thing about Aspen, of course, is I mean, talk about it's really kind of a first world problem here, right? I mean, you know, in terms of, I mean, in a more global sense, the question of greed is couched really against the masses of people who are in dire poverty, right? And when you see all that, is there a better way than our current economic systems and structures to try and help those people rise out of that poverty? You know, there's an interesting clip that we've got teed up over here that Jeremy can run for us from many years ago with Phil Donahue and Milton Friedman.
When you see around the globe the maldistribution of wealth, the desperate plight of millions of people in underdeveloped countries, when you see so few haves and so many have-nots, when you see the greed and the concentration of power within, did you ever have a moment of doubt about capitalism and whether greed's a good idea to run on?
Well, first of all, tell me, is there some society you know that doesn't run on greed? You think Russia doesn't run on greed? You think China doesn't run on greed? What is greed? Of course, none of us are greedy. It's only the other fellow who's greedy. The world runs on individuals pursuing their separate interests. The great achievements of civilization have not come from government bureaus. Einstein didn't construct his theory under order from a bureaucrat. Henry Ford didn't revolutionize the automobile industry that way. In the only cases in which the masses have escaped from the kind of grinding poverty you're talking about, the only cases in recorded history are where they have had capitalism and largely free trade. If you want to know where the masses are worst off, it's exactly in the kinds of societies that depart from that. So that the record of history is absolutely crystal clear, that there is no alternative way so far discovered of improving the lot of the ordinary people that can hold a candle to the productive activities that are unleashed by a free enterprise system.
But it seems to reward not virtue as much as ability to manipulate the system.
And what does reward virtue? You think a communist commissar rewards virtue? You think a Hitler rewards virtue? You think, excuse me, if you'll pardon me, do you think American presidents reward virtue? Do they choose their appointees on the basis of the virtue of the people appointed or on the basis of their political clout? Is it really true that political self-interest is nobler somehow than economic self-interest? You know, I think you're taking a lot of things for granted. And just tell me where in the world you find these angels who are going to organize society for us. Well, I don't even trust you to do that.
They certainly want money, but they don't. But it's not what drives them. It's not what motivates them. It's the power. You know, and you see that a lot in politics, right?
And it's an illusion. Power is an illusion.
That's interesting. I mean, why do you say
really
that?
Is. I think it's what you feel it is, and it's not real. Power doesn't move mountains. I mean that's ridiculous. But I think power is only what the person who holds the power perceives it as. It's an illusion.
So, and it's certainly temporary,
it's not
right?
tangible.
It's not tangible.
We're seeing today how temporary it might be with our president.
Right.
I mean, ultimate power. But
right.
It's an illusion.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is.
Yeah.
With politics, it's always confused me that someone will want to stay in power to the point that they will compromise what, their original platform that they ran on, or what they said they were going to DC to do, and and they make these votes so that they get reelected. And to me, it's always been confusing. Why would you want to be reelected for something you don't believe in, to then go represent something you don't believe in? Like that, I don't understand what that power is that could feel so good that you want to do a job that is miserable, and most of the country thinks that as a whole Congress is messed up and not doing a good job. Why would you want to stay in that job all of a sudden not doing what you went there to do? Why do people hold on? Why do they compromise their values to get reelected?
Maybe it's greed because because of that position, they're attaining a lot of stuff, whether it's power, free stuff at the store, a great salary, recognition, being on CNN. I mean, that's maybe what they're getting out of it. Their greed. They're getting something out of that position, even though they're selling their constituents a bill of goods. I think a lot of politicians go home and tell their constituents what they want to hear and then go back to Washington and do something different. And no one back home is really paying attention to how their congressmen and senators vote.
Right.
Until it gets brought to their attention.
Right. And of course, the power of the media and the power of the power of incumbency is very great. And so once you're in that office, it's really hard to root people out once they're in an elected office if there aren't term limits.
Yeah.
So and then you become part of that system and you start to prioritize. I remember Tom Foley. You remember Tom Foley was a congressman from Washington State back in '94. It was 2 years after Clinton was elected, and it was kind of that tidal wave year when the Republicans took over the House of Representatives, and Foley was the Speaker of the House, and he got beat by a brand newcomer whose name I'm not going to remember, who said that he was going to be like only run for 3 terms. It's 2-year terms. I'm only third term came, and he just kept going. I mean, I get and Washington, that part of Washington, the Spokane area, they surrendered the speakership of the House for this guy. So it's a really interesting example. And once he got in there, the power of the system. And Foley got in trouble really because he was seen as a Washington insider. His primary residence was in Washington, D.C., not in Washington State. He was cozy with all kinds of lobbyists. He'd been there for a long time. And so he was seen as not really representing their interests anymore. So maybe he got what he deserved at some level, but it was really interesting.
Well, I hope we see that a lot in November, that a lot of Americans are going to realize that their senators and congressmen are not doing what we sent them to Washington to do.
Right.
I think there's much more sunshine on a lot of these guys than there's ever been. Well, we'll see if we get turned upside down by it.
Yeah, there is, and I mean, there's a lot of greed there, right? I mean,
greed, ego. Is there a difference between greed and ego? I mean, are they so similar that?
Well, one kind of drives the other, right? Yeah, I mean, everybody's got an ego. Everybody's got an ego at some level.
I really liked. I mean, the way you described greed earlier was like not sharing. I think that's like a particular trait of greed. So I don't know how much those go together. Because again, what Friedman's trying to say is self-interest, and self-interest and greed need to be split up. His point is only valid if you think ambition and self-interest is inherently greedy, and I think those get peeled apart. I think not sharing. I think wanting more than you could ever spend through in money or ever use for yourself. Then we get to the greed level. But I don't know that just wanting to be popular, like ego, I'm not saying that's a great trait. I think it's still one of the sins, but I don't think that in itself is a negative.
Right.
But I guess the question then is who and how do you draw the line on what's enough? Because, more than one person should have. Preparing for this, I'm thinking about Walt Disney's daughter, who is really speaking out against Bob Iger, who's the top guy at Disney or ESPN, one or the other, making this exorbitant salary.
Yeah, the parent company.
More than the guy at Disney who's dressed up like Pluto makes. And, she said, "Why? I don't know what the salary is. I'm sure it's hundreds of millions of dollars. Why does one guy have to make hundreds of millions of dollars to run this company?
Right.
What is too much?" You know, should no one? I wrote down that there's 607 billionaires in the United States.
607.
And there's only 2,600 in the world. So we have the majority of them.
Mm-hmm.
And how much is too much? Do you need a billion? Do you need Bezos is 46 billion? Why?
$1 billion is you spend $1 million for 1,000 years. That's $1 billion. So
Well, and
it's a lot of money.
There
right?
are like agreed upon parameters for nonprofits, for instance, the Charity Navigator organization. You get a rating based on how much more your executive director makes than the lowest paid person. And I know there's for-profit companies like Ben & Jerry's in my childhood was known for this, that their executive would never make, I think, 10 times more, which is still so much more, but never make 10 times more than the lowest paid person. So I think there's people who are watching, and I don't know that the actual numbers, there's an obvious point when it becomes greed or not, but I think there's an agreed upon excess that some watchdogs have on their list.
I think some is indisputable too. $46 billion. I think that's a little too much.
Well,
That's a lot of
I mean,
pickup
look
trucks.
at how much is
A lot of
how much is
snowmobiles, as you would say.
how much are Bill and Melinda Gates worth now? I mean, they were at the height of their wealth. They were close to $100 billion, I think, and they, of course, the Gates Foundation, and they shifted a lot of their wealth over the years to that, and they have. I mean, he's still billionaire many, many times over, right? But who do you trust to use that wealth more, him or the government? I mean, would you really want Elizabeth Warren or Donald Trump or somebody like that
Have 46 billion.
have taking that money? And the key to me is in that aspect is ambition has great value. It can leave a damage path, but ambition has created the greatest inventions and developments that we've seen in lots of different fields, in medicine, in technology, and if you create a structure, a taxation structure that eliminates the reward for that ambition and the risk that you take, what is that dividing line? If you think of it almost like an algorithm or as an algebraic formula, what's the dividing line where that lives?
And in that video, Friedman mentions Henry Ford and Einstein. They were ambitious. They weren't greedy.
That's right.
I think they would probably would have rather have invented the car than had $10 billion. That they wanted to achieve and do something great for people. So that is an interesting point. And then there's a flat tax help that. And where's the dividing line on that? Right. Should Bill Gates be paying 20% or 33% just like we pay?
Right.
And that's it, flat.
Right.
I mean, I'm not sure. I don't agree with that.
Yeah, it's a little arrogant, I think, for the government to believe that their tax policies can actually create incentives to make things better. In most cases where they try to do things to make, it seems to me as though they're really running. It's like Russian roulette. They're running the risk of really making things worse. They might not make things worse, and maybe the economy is getting better anyway, and they can take credit for, a tax cut here, making things better. Or, I mean, the one that stands out in my mind is when back in the late '80s, I think the federal government put a federal luxury tax on luxury boats. So like, pleasure craft over a certain size. It was like a 20% tax. And it decimated the industry. There were like tens of thousands of people lost their jobs. And they ended up rolling that tax back because it really, really damaged an industry. And that industry, of course, is related to shipbuilding and other ways. So you're basically, it cut in half the number of skilled tradesmen who knew how to build boats and ships, which, we need even for things like national defense, right? And they realized it was a big mistake, and so they rolled that tax back. So
I don't think we're doing business versus government, as you phrased it a moment ago. I mean, I think there's the billionaire pledge, right, where Warren Buffett has gotten billionaires and millionaires to pledge half of their earnings when they die go to charity. So we're not taxing them. They still were business people and got their profits. It's going back to the community in some point. But I also think there's it's a myth to say if all of our roads are perfectly paved and we all have health insurance and all of our infants have daycare, then all of a sudden Americans will be unambitious. We're not going to leave the house. We're not going to invent anything anymore because we have it so good from these socialized programs. I think part of purpose, part of being a human is to have purpose and have a job and have meaning. And if you take away some of the barriers to, you know, you're really having the Einsteins be the scientists, you're really having the Henry Fords be the auto mechanics, and you're not having to decide what you do in this one life based on some of the other factors that come into not having wealth, then you have a chugging along America, right? So I think that comes back to our mental health issue too. You know, the purpose means a lot, and if you come here and you find you don't have a purpose because you have 3 serving jobs, you know, because you came here to ski, you came here to be someone, you can't, whatever, and keeping up has led you away from purpose. I think we do have a really big problem with mental health and depression, and that I think that leads to some of that. So finding who you could be if only, you know.
That's a great
point.
We're talking about. I love that. I could be that person if only I had graduated from college or I had done whatever, but I don't even know if that's real.
Yeah.
But
Right.
I do know that it does feel bad when you've got 3 serving jobs and you're serving the haves and you have not. It doesn't feel good.
Right.
It can't. And do you just say there for the grace of God, go, I mean, I wish I was that guy and I'm not, and just that's what I did. I mean, or it's a tough spot to be in, and I think a lot of people in this community struggle with the have and have-nots.
They start to feel boxed in.
Yeah, especially because the have-nots are really what's holding us together.
Yeah.
You know?
I don't have to interact with our visitors in my role as a local news reporter. A lot of my friends do, and I think I don't even know what I don't know about how good life could get if I was greedy. I don't know what I'm missing. I didn't know you could have 6 suitcases on the airplane, but I've talked to the flight attendant who gets treated like a servant when she's putting them in the overhead, you know?
Right.
So I think the exposure, you know, we talked about the culture is kind of leading to this in a way that we don't quite understand, but I think maybe the exposure to Aspen's visitors. So I don't know if there's more greed in Aspen, especially, again, from who are we talking about is Aspen. The locals might not be that greedy, except for now they know what they don't have.
Right. That's true, and I actually, wherever we came from, I know where I came from, nobody lived like this. So you're right, I didn't know there was such a thing as a 25,000 square foot home.
A
Right.
party home,
That
next
was
to your
the
home,
gym
just for
in
the
our
parties.
school.
Yes.
That was the gym.
Right.
So I had no idea that any building could be that
Could
big.
be that big, right.
And then to hear salaries and worth, that's something I didn't know about. And when
Yeah.
you come here from Indiana, you're in the same boat. And some people adjust to it, and other people probably take it as if, why aren't I
Right.
succeeding?
Right.
Well, I think any place there's great wealth, I think things are, the elements are, that the trappings and the elements in our society are more acute. So, you know, the rich are richer. The only difference here maybe is the poor aren't poorer, right? Although relatively they might be, and we certainly do have a homeless issue, and there's a team starting to try and work on that here in the Upper Valley, and that's good because the human issues don't go away, and the Valley is certainly urbanizing, and you know a lot of people don't like that word, and I don't necessarily like that word, but it's true. I mean, and you have to kind of name your issue if you're going to talk about it honestly, I think. And the Roaring Fork Valley is urbanizing. Where we've made it easier. We've built a 4-lane highway, 4-lane divided highway. You know, we've got an airport that has 35 flights a day. You can fly here from Atlanta for $235 one way. You know, so the federal government kind of subsidizes that, by the way. You know, if you understand how airports work and the cost of those facilities and all that, because the airline industry and the aviation industry is really important. They make a lot of donations to congressmen.
I still don't understand why they want to keep their jobs.
Speaking of, you start connecting the dots on these things, and those issues become more acute in a small place like this.
Yeah.
Right, and so. You know, and the purpose piece I think is really interesting and really important because obviously, I mean, there's a lot of research that shows that living a purposeful life is central, right? I mean, if you don't feel like you're I think you're exactly right. If you don't feel like you're living a purposeful life, it really starts to hollow you out. And so, is that a harder thing here than it is in other places? It sounds like you guys think it is.
I have one comment. We are not living in poverty. I absolutely agree with you. It's much worse off most places. We turn on the tap water, we can drink it, all that's there. But Pitkin County is the highest cost burden county in the state, which means people are making trade-offs. It's because of our housing costs, because of rent. Usually that's what people prioritize. They do put a roof over their head. But then the next thing that drops off is health. So whether that means eating healthy, which costs more money, or going to the doctor, paying for a therapist once a week. So I think that there's higher trade-offs here because of the cost of living, and that does make it harder. And yeah, so then what are you deciding? I mean, you can live a little cheaper down valley, and then all your time is going toward commuting, so then you lose some purpose there. You're deciding to live in Aspen and spend all your money on rent, but you're having to give up any time to go on the mountain, which is where you got your purpose anyway.
Right.
So I do think that the cost of living, the cost burden, digs away at that purpose a little bit. Which is why it's so silly to me when people say, don't build anymore, don't make it easy to come here, everyone would do this. Like, it's not, that's hard. It is very hard to sacrifice your life in order to live here.
Right.
And I don't know that many people would choose on purpose to spend 52 weeks cost burden.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's really interesting because I've known people who have moved away for all these reasons, and like they're gone for 3 months and then they move back.
Yeah. The yard didn't quite
because it's like, okay,
equal the
so I moved to Fort Collins, I moved to Loveland, or I moved to Nebraska, or I moved to wherever.
Yeah.
And it's like I've got a yard. It's like, but it's not Aspen. It's not the same. It's not. I don't get that vibe when I get up, and I don't have that exciting feeling. I want to see what the day brings. You know, it's not. And there's an aspect of that. There's an extroverted element to that, I think, as well. I mean, this is a town that is kind of built for extroverts. You know, and I'm not really an extrovert. I'm kind of an introvert. But
That's the guy with the TV show.
like, turn it on when the cameras come out.
Right.
Wow.
The guy with the bright lights and the cameras says that. I don't understand.
I think that speaks to the urbanization, though. I still think we live in rural America because I can't buy socks within a 4-hour drive. You know, I still think it's if I want a cheeseburger, you know, like
Amazon Prime.
That's a whole nother. Let's do an issue on Amazon Prime.
There's a whole nother level.
I've had it for 30 days in my whole life, and I'm quitting it today. I can't stand it. But I think that rural nature, then you do rely on who did you run into in the grocery store, and you have to be extroverted enough that you'll say hello to every acquaintance you've ever met every time you walk out the door.
It's really interesting because I don't think of Aspen as rural.
Oh my gosh.
I think of it as small town urban.
Okay.
Because I mean, I've lived and I've got family in rural America, and I've grown up I've spent time on the family farm,
right.
and my brother lives in a rural town in western Iowa, and I think that there are rural areas very nearby, but I think of Aspen as kind of a small town urban environment.
Well, and I would probably disagree with Alycin respectfully that I think we might be geographically rural, but I think as a community we're global. I mean, the things and the people and what comes through here is really a big picture.
Right.
We might be geographically urban, but rural, but this community is really global.
It's a beautiful combination of the culture. I mean, the intellectual hub that we get.
That's why we moved here. That's exactly why we moved
with the rural feeling. I mean,
I agree with that completely.
You go in any 1 mile outside of Aspen in any direction, you don't have internet, you don't have cell service. There's medical procedures that you cannot get anywhere near here. I mean, I think there are a lot of things that is rural living and the small town life. I guess I think of it as just like we have one mercantile shop and you're going to see everyone there, and it's kind of it's got everything from makeup to medicine.
Right.
But I think that's
we're not like honky tonk. Like we're not. We have the culture.
Don't name a community. It won't get you. You won't get very far if you name another
Yeah,
town.
we're not. Maybe I don't even know the right words. Like classic or what are the words for like little behind in culture. We're absolutely at the forefront and an international hub. I agree with that.
Yeah, but we also get greed attached to that.
Absolutely.
If you move up Castle Creek Road, you don't have Wi-Fi. And then somebody who bought their mega home there is now really angry that they can't get connected to Wi-Fi.
Right.
And that's a part of greed. Wait a minute, I could get this anywhere else. Why can't I get it here? Because you can't.
Yeah.
Because we're intentionally rural in that component.
Right.
I used when I was thinking about this show, the word entitlement kept coming up in my mind. So it's my least favorite trait of anything. I deserve this, and I think entitlement and greed maybe go together more hand in hand than ambition and greed.
Right. Well, certainly here there's that dimension, right? And there's you have so many governmental programs as well that kind of substitute for free market availability, accessibility in other communities. That I think that plays a role in setting expectations for what I should be able to have if I live here compared to somewhere else. Housing being one of those. The access to, I mean, you know, even a ski pass here, even at like the ACRA rate for whatever it is now $1,500 or something like that, super early to ski here. I mean, it's like, are you kidding me? I mean, that's tremendously low price for a year-round ski, for a premier ski pass at one of the finest ski resorts in the world. And so I think that might play a role. And then that entitlement around the kind of almost what you might call the poser intention mentality. You know, I see all this wealth around me and I want to try and be that.
That's never related to. I mean, I've seen it, but it's really that is classically odd to me. That
it's very unique.
Want to emulate, be something they're not in a town where we all know you're not. You know, most of us, once again, I keep using Alycin, she comes all Gucci'd out and stuff. I'm going to go, who are you trying to kid? You are writing for a newspaper. I know, you're posing.
You would arrest me immediately. You would know I stole it because I was greedy.
But you're posing to nobody. Everyone could see through that charade. And, you know, just to change topics for a second is, you know, when I was coming here, and my friends and I were talking about this a few weeks ago, when did Aspen change? When did we become so glitzy and glamorous? Okay, I moved here in 1980. I do not remember wealth, glitz, glamour, anything like that. What I remember is a lot of locals trying to keep the place alive with visitors that came in. It wasn't the excess of wealth. You saw celebrities who would come here and envy you. Yeah. They'd say, I live in LA, I wish I could just be the ski bum that you are, or live in this environment. So then we tracked it down to about the mid-90s, maybe. Mid to late 90s is when I think we started seeing wealth, real wealth come in here. And now, you know, we've got our share of billionaires, so it's only gone up. But I don't know what tipped it in mid-90s that went from just a bunch of ski bums making it, and we're here to make you happy. And yeah, it costs money to get here, but we still had the Little Red Ski House, and you could stay here for $75 a night or whatever it might have been. And all that's gone, and that evaporated when wealth came in, and maybe greed. But it wasn't always this way in my lifetime. So I know there was quiet years, if you will, in Aspen in the last 25 or 30 years. It wasn't always, my recollection, not always known glitz, glamour, money. It wasn't.
And I think it's got to be attached to the perceived value of property and access to that. And property is an investment, because there's and I don't want to get too wonky, but you know, there's a long-term index called the CaseShiller Index. And it was started in the it goes back to it wasn't started in the 1890s, it goes back to the 1890s. It measures median home value in the United States for the last 120 years. And between 1890 and 1990, the median home value in the United States, adjusted for inflation, increased. How much do you think it increased? Between 1890, 10%. Over 100 years, over a century. Between 1990 and the Great Recession of 2007, it increased, I think, like 195%.
There you go.
And there were some changes that were made in terms of regulatory changes made in terms of financial markets, how you can loan money, how you can access property through debt. There were a lot of changes, a lot of creativity came out of the 90s, a lot of additional aspects to the opportunity for wealth building in a general sense, I think, on the debt side. That might have had an impact in places not just here but worldwide, and that may have been one thing, and I think I think it's just a great place too. I mean, if you're as people who are and I think that initial start, the 70s and the 80s that you described, I think that sowed the seeds of interest in Aspen and kind of created the brand as this unique getaway place that was special and unique and genuine and real, and you can go there and you can be part of that, and then everybody came here to be part of that, and then because everybody came here, it's not that anymore.
And the minute somebody's $200,000 home became $1 million home is when it started to tip. From there, it's no stopping it now.
Right. Yeah. So how do we help people who are struggling with this?
First step is admitting it. You have to
First step,
greedy.
It's like a 12-step program.
Right, you have to admit you're greedy.
Admit you're greedy.
No.
So,
but I think I'm greedy in some ways. There's some things in my life I don't know if it's greedy or selfish maybe.
Okay.
There might be a big difference between greedy and selfish, but I don't know how we change. I don't know that we can change it.
well, there's an element of human nature that Maslow's hierarchy of needs is the thing that everybody kind of turns to as the kind of the foundational baseline for how people look at themselves. If everything, and that's very, it's a very old school psychology, right? That everything drives back to your own needs, and if your individual needs, the more your individual needs are met, the more self-actualized you can be, and the more you can kind of step outside yourself and see the needs of others and be more understanding and more kind of globally minded in how you look at the world, and that's going to be different for everybody. So, do we attract a certain kind of people here who have insatiable needs for themselves? I don't think so. That's not what I see. I mean, to your point, there's more nonprofits in this valley than there is anywhere else on the planet, which is, and some of them might be better off in other places where they could be used more, where it could be more effective, right? So, I mean, if you've...
and I don't know if those are nonprofits to be benevolent or are they shelters for greed.
Well, there's a lot of enlightened...
Or a source for purpose.
Well,
I think
there's
once you get so much money, there's people who are like, well, what I'm going to do is start a nonprofit. I think a lot of the single person has started a nonprofit to give back to the cause, because what else are they going to do with their time? They have more than enough.
And pay themselves a salary.
Well, that's where the scheme factor comes in. Is there kind of a scheme to some of this?
Well, there's some.
Why would you go to work every day and in order to pay yourself a salary if you already have the money?
Well, this is why.
I would never.
Well,
it's an illusion to make it look like you're one of us.
Well, that's the enlightened self-interest argument. But it all comes back to nonprofit services are good. They fill in the gaps. They bridge the gaps. But fundamentally, is commerce really the answer? I mean, is there to solving problems of, and is a certain amount of greed a necessary or even to be expected kind of a side cost of commerce that will generate the jobs and create that'll lift people out of poverty in a way that is really beneficial, because that's where you really create wealth and where you really create those opportunities. I mean, Jeff Bezos made his money by building a business that in a way that nobody ever thought of before, that is really valuable, and people use it all the time. And so all those jobs he created, all the people that that he pays salaries to, that have mortgages, that have kids going to college, that are going on vacations, that are donating themselves to nonprofits. All of that a lot of it comes from those billionaires, right? So Is Venezuela really a better option than that? And that's an extreme. And I don't like extreme options, but they work well on television. So extreme comparisons.
Are we assuming that all really wealthy people are greedy? I think maybe we are, and I don't want to do that.
Yeah, I would be on your side.
I don't want to. I mean, because we're just talking about Jeff Bezos. Yes, he's created tens of thousands of jobs for people. I don't know that he's greedy or not, but I want to be careful not to attach greed and wealth. I think there are greedy, wealthy people.
And greedy poor people.
And greedy, and like I said, I could be greedy with my time.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
There's greedy poor people.
So if you're looking for a solution, I think I have to, the people who are visiting, because this is already where their second or third or fourth home is, that's way above Maslow's hierarchy. You need one shelter, Maslow says.
According
when
to
you're
you.
when you're on your as a human in this philosophy, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, shelter is one of the absolute inherent ones.
Right.
But you need one. So if you already have the fourth of something that every human needs one of, then you maybe are more inclined to also need the fourth snowmobile, the fourth steak dinner, the fourth whatever. Again, I would call that our visitors. I'm very protective of our locals who I don't think on a whole are greedy. So I think if we say there's greed in Aspen, it would be really hard for me to come around to say that is Aspenites who are being greedy. So I don't know that there's a fix needed except for maybe that envy, that jealousy that we see.
Well, the premise is that it's not the locals that are greedy.
Okay.
It's that the locals are being exploited by the greedy outsiders who come in here and capture all the wealth and value and drive the way the community works. And
you become subservient to them.
And you become their serfs
because of a checkbook.
Yeah, and to your point, the flight attendant is treated like a servant.
That's right.
Rather than a person. And that's real. I mean, that really does happen here. It happens not just here, but it happens here, and it happens a lot of other places. And it does affect people's psyches and how they feel.
It could cause resentment towards the guy with the luggage,
right?
And it is how we make our living.
Yeah.
Without any of these people, we do not survive.
So how was it back in the day before you saw all these rich people here, though? Then we were our fine little mediocre town.
I have to tell you the truth. I really don't remember having a hard time finding a place to live.
Right.
I don't remember glitzy, glamorous cars. It's hard to throw a snowball without hitting a Range Rover.
Cadillac.
Or a Bentley weekend. When those Bentleys come in here every summer, it's a head scratcher to me.
Right.
So you didn't have that. You didn't see it.
Yeah.
It just didn't feel that way. And like I said, as soon as a lot of the big name realtors today that we know, older white dudes, I came here with, they were nail pounders. Somewhere, like I said, in 1994 or mid-90s, somebody sold the first $1 million home, and those guys went right towards it. And from there, there was no stopping it.
Right.
That's when I think it switched from, wait a minute, I don't have to hit these nails anymore. I just have to show that home. And those people fill out the paperwork, and it became a real estate-driven economy. But granted, number one is tourism. But real estate is a big part of this community, and it's where the money is. So that's where it might have tipped over, is when home prices became unattainable.
Yeah. So we got a little bit of time left in our hour. How can you help people? There's another quick video I want to show real quick, if that's okay. It goes through kind of the 5 problems with greed. It gives us a chance maybe to talk about how people
There's that many? I thought there's only like one.
Greed is an intense and selfish desire to have more. And whether it's at home or at work or on a team or in your own life, greed will destroy you. Here are 5 problems that come with greed. Number 1, jealousy. Greed will make you jealous because you'll always be comparing yourself to the people around you, and there's always going to be someone who has more than you. Now, maybe you'll have more than a lot of other people, but there's always that one person that's got more than you, and you're going to be shooting for that person and gunning for that person. So you're inevitably going to be jealous if you're greedy. Number 2, dishonesty. See, if you're a greedy person, at some point, you're going to end up cheating and stealing to get more of what you want. Now, maybe right now you're saying, no, there's no way. I'm a little greedy, but I'm not dishonest. Well, you just wait. Number 3, shallow relationships. See, a jealous, dishonest person is going to put himself or herself around people who are just going to help them. And those are, by definition, shallow relationships. They're not going to last very long. So greedy people end up being alone and miserable for the rest of their lives. Number 4, lack of focus. See, greedy people a lot of times start out with a great sense of mission and direction and vector in their life. But over time, greed just sort of overtakes a person and you lose your focus. Because if you're focused on your money or getting more, you can't also focus on the true mission of your life or your business. I mean, you can only focus on one thing. You can only make one thing your God. And inevitably, if you're greedy, getting more is going to be your God. And number 5, dissatisfaction. See, the greedy person at the end of the day is a dissatisfied person because by definition, greed is this intense and selfish desire to get more. Well, so just listen to that and think about that. If that's your goal, if that's your desire, you just want to get more and more and more and more, you'll never get there. You'll never be satisfied. And those are 5 problems with greed. Now, maybe you can think of some more, but why don't you use those resources below to talk about this with your mentor or your team?
That was actually really good.
So it's interesting, I think. We talked a lot about jealousy and dishonesty, purpose, we talked about that, and dissatisfaction. We really didn't hit much on the relationships in our conversation. And, I'm interested in your guys' thoughts on relationships with people in Aspen, because I've had both ends of the spectrum. I've made lifelong friends here that I can't imagine, having a life without, and I've had relationships with people that are exclusively transactional, and it's more acute here. It's the same other places. You see it at other places, but I've seen both sides, and that one. It's interesting that didn't come up in the conversation previously. I'm interested in your guys' thoughts on that.
Go, Alycin.
Yeah, I think we've got some grifters and swindlers and people who, some smooth talkers. It kind of makes me think of more of that Wild West etiquette, like the tradesman, trade post. I've seen that here in places I have not, in ways I haven't in other places. People who know how to, hey, I'll help you. I think of it a lot with the dudes who are loading their. I'm going to just use snowmobiles this entire time. They need someone to help load their trailer, and they'll help you load someday. But actually, I was tired on my day, and so I scored more than he did in that trade. I think there are some transactions, even among locals here, that is a bummer and almost a craft.
It is. I think it is almost a craft. I think you're right.
So and it leads back to the shallow relationship. Leads, I think, to me back to purpose and back to the health and mental health aspects that you, if that's the only way you're relating though to people, it's devastating.
I mean, I've gone to events when I was with the city, and you go to an event at the Institute, and the person who's running the event, you want to. I was the city's finance director, so you try and develop relationships with people in the community, and there's the classic handoff. It's like, hi, Paul, how you doing? Have you met so-and-so? And then they hand you off to that person, and then they're gone. And that's happened to me many times. And it's like, oh, okay, now I know that this is a transactional discussion. And I don't know how much of that is just business and what they have to do, or how much of it is who they are, in those moments. But I've seen that a lot more here than other places. Joey, what do you think?
I don't know. I mean, my friends here are such a wide variety of people, and I get accused of having crazy, wacky friends. But I've got a lot of people who have nothing, and a lot of people who have too much, or a lot.
Right.
Probably too much. And I think I'm savvy enough to kind of disregard the transactional relationships. I think I know when they're happening, and to kind of get away from them. But I think that, the spectrum is what I live in. I don't want to be on any one side too much. I mean, you want to stay balanced in your relationships.
Right. Yeah.
And you know, it was interesting when
not pursue those people that are just transactional.
Exactly. You know,
Yeah.
you know who they are. I have a little tolerance for that.
And that's
you
really,
know?
and that's probably adds to a lot of these other issues.
And that's a pitfall in my work.
Right.
I mean, believe me, whether you're a celebrity or the local sheriff, or maybe even the host of your own show, or a newspaper reporter who could be quite influential, you will know when there's smoke up your ass.
Yeah.
You know what it feels like. And so I try and stay away from those. And, you know, watching that video when he said somebody always has more, you think Bill Gates ever sits there and somebody goes, you know, somebody always has more, and he goes, actually, no.
Actually, no.
No, actually, I pretty much have it all.
Well, this has been great, guys. We're going to wrap it up now. I think we're getting close to the end. But any last thoughts before we wrap it up? 30 seconds each.
I have no last thoughts.
No last thoughts?
I yield my time to Alycin, because that
time
seems
to
to be
Alycin?
very appropriate these days, to yield your time.
I don't think that greed is going to get our local community anywhere. I think ambition, I think everyone agreeing that we're okay with what we have, and a lot of what we have is natural, and we'll be here way longer than we are. We'll never attain a mountain, you know.
Right.
I think there's definitely a societal conversation we could have to make those who are here and feel that they're chasing, teach them that they don't even have to be in that race.
Yeah.
But I think there's also something to be said for ambition, and I think that we have some crafty people here, and that will always be around, and just wanting to share and not want more than you can take is where we're at.
And I will take an opportunity to add on to that, is that, you know, this is my home. It's been for a long time. I don't think we could go without saying that I think we're talking about greed, and I think it's a minority in where we live. I think by far the majority of the people in this town are not greedy. In fact, some are so generous, and those are regular folk. But I think we're talking about a small slice of this population, and that probably goes by for nationally. I think, at least in this community, I think we are full of really good people. And the greedy ones, like I said, you recognize them and stay away from them.
Yep.
Maybe,
Sheriff.
I think maybe they should wear name tags.
Maybe they should. Sheriff Joe DiSalvo.
Thank you.
Alycin Bektesh, Aspen Daily News. And Upload.
Listen, subscribe.
Listen to the Upload. Subscribe to the Upload. I'm Paul Menter. This is Think for a Change. We're out.
Thank you.
Thank you.